Okay, good morning, everyone, and welcome to Hope for Hemlocks, Biocontrols, Volunteers, and Tips for Landowners. My name is Sean Kittle, and I am the Communications Manager with the Adirondack Park Invasive Plant Program, and I'm going to kick us off this morning. So we have two great speakers today. First up, we're going to have Nick Dietschler. He's the Forest Health Researcher with New York State Hemlock Initiative at Cornell University. And then after that, we're going to have Ari Giller-Leinwohl. He's with the Adirondack Park Invasive Plant Program. He's our Terrestrial Invasive Species Manager. And here's a quick overview of what we're going to talk about today. So I'm going to give everyone a quick welcome and an introduction to invasive species. We like to make sure everyone is speaking the same language. And then Nick is going to take over and talk about hemlock woolly adelgid, biocontrols, and options for landowners. The nice thing about this webinar is it starts kind of broad with some of the larger efforts that are being done to, kind of abate the worst impacts of hemlock woolly adelgid. And then we're going to narrow it down to what landowners can do. And then Ari is going to take over and talk about what you can do as an individual through our Forest Pest Hunters program. Ari's also going to dive into HWA ID, which will help you get out there and monitor for hemlock woolly adelgid. And then we have Douglas Knopf, who is going to briefly talk about the HWA Challenge, which is a New York statewide challenge through IMAP Invasives. And then we'll have a Q&A. So for the Q&A, I ask everyone, please don't interrupt the speakers. If you have a question, you can type it into the chat or you can wait until the Q&A section. We have a lot of people here today, so we want to kind of keep it under control. So please, we're going to wait till the end for the Q&A. We will let people come off mute during the Q&A too. So if you'd rather ask your question by speaking it, you're welcome to do that as well. But feel free to type into the chat anytime if you have a question. All right, so let's do a little introduction into invasive species. And first, I just want to introduce APIPP. We have a lot of people here today that are not in the Adirondacks. I saw Ithaca, I saw Western New York. It's really great, Pennsylvania even. So we are one of 8 partnerships for regional invasive species management across New York State. We call it PRISM, P-R-I-S-M for short. And if you live in New York State, you live in one of these 8 PRISMs. The whole state has a PRISM in it, the whole network, statewide network. So our service area, you can see on the map there, is the Adirondack Park, and we go all the way north up to Canada. And our program is funded by the Environmental Protection Fund, which is administered by the New York State DEC. And we are housed in the Nature Conservancy's Keene Valley office here in the Adirondacks. Very beautiful place. So in short, our mission is to work in partnership to minimize the impact of invasive species on the Adirondack region's communities, lands, and waters. I like to tell people invasive species are primarily spread by human activity, and that's why we focus so much on education, because frankly, it's a lot easier to prevent invasive species from moving around than it is to deal with them once they've arrived. So we also do a lot of trainings like this and webinars. We get out in the public, we do tabling events. We teach people how to identify invasive species and also how to do their own management if they have invasives on their property. And we work on land and in water, and we have a lot of partnerships. More than 30 organizations around the region. And we also have a lot of volunteers. And Ari's going to talk about this later, but volunteers are really essential. We have an enormous area that we cover, and we can't do it all alone. There's only a few of us on the APIPP staff, so we really rely on volunteers to get out there and just kind of tell us what they're seeing and to report what they're seeing so we can learn more and be more strategic about our work. And of course, we have a website, www.adkinvasives.com. So what is an invasive species? In order for a species to be considered invasive, it has to meet these 2 criteria. So not native to the region in question. We're talking about the Adirondacks here today, and it's often moved there by humans. That's really important to keep in mind. But also, 2, it has to cause harm to the environment, the economy, or public health. So an invasive species has to satisfy both of those criteria. And notice this says or public health, right? So it's not necessarily all 3 of those. So here's a couple examples. We have poison ivy up at the top. Poison ivy does cause harm to public health. If you've ever had a poison ivy rash, you've experienced that firsthand, but it is native to the region. So we do not consider poison ivy to be invasive, no matter how much we might not like it. Next down, we have a tomato. Tomatoes actually are not native, but they don't cause any kind of a harm to the environment, economy, or public health. So we do not consider tomatoes to be an invasive species. They are not native, but they don't cause any harm. And at the bottom, we have hemlock woolly adelgid. I'm not going to dive too far into this because you're going to hear a lot about hemlock woolly adelgid today, but the young adelgid do feed on hemlock, and that causes damage to the tree, and over time it can cause dieback, and it could also cause tree mortality. So hemlock woolly adelgid is not native to the region, and it does cause harm to the environment, so we consider it to be an invasive species. And I just wanted to give you a quick overview of some of the characteristics of invasive species. And a lot of these really also touch upon why they're so hard to get rid of once they're here. They lack predators and parasites. A good example of that is in the lower right-hand corner here, that red berry. That's Japanese barberry. It's a really spiky plant. It's a poor forage for animals in our area, but it also has these nasty thorns that keep animals at bay. Mice also love to hide under it because it's like this little refuge for them. Animals don't like to mess with those thorns. And more mice means more ticks, and more ticks means more Lyme disease. And there have been studies that have shown that there's higher instances of Lyme disease in forests that have a lot of Japanese barberry. And then we have produce many offspring and seeds. So here you have purple loosestrife in the top left, and those are the seeds from one plant. It can produce millions of seeds a year. And if you've ever seen a picture of a wetland that's been sort of overtaken by purple loosestrife, and you imagine that each plant is producing this many seeds, it's not hard to draw the connection that that's a huge problem. Many invasive species produce or reproduce by multiple means. So up in the upper right here, we have yellow iris, and yellow iris can reproduce by producing seeds or through these really fast-growing rhizomes that go underground. Uh, Generalists. Yeah, so a lot of invasive species, oops, sorry, getting excited here. A lot of invasive species are generalists, meaning they're not too picky about where they grow. It could be disturbed soil, it could be shady, it could be light, it could be a lot of water, it could be a little bit of water. This means they can outcompete a lot of native plants that might be a little pickier about the conditions they grow in. And here we have Tree of Heaven, sorry. Tree of Heaven's a good example of a generalist species. And then they tend to monopolize resources. So once established, invasive species can form a monoculture. We'll see a picture of that on the next slide. That basically means they hog all of the resources for themselves, and it's really difficult for native species to coexist with them. And I just wanted to give you three examples here. We talked about negative impacts on the environment, public health, or the economy. So in the top right, there's that monoculture I was mentioning. That is garlic mustard. You'd be pretty hard pressed to find any other plant growing in the understory here. The garlic mustard has completely overtaken this forest understory. For the economy, in the lower right, we have knotweed. You can see that this knotweed is spilling over the guardrail. It's starting to block the sign. Knotweed is a huge problem for DOT people because it grows very quickly. And, imagine if somebody had an emergency and they had to pull over on the shoulder of the road here. That's going to be pretty hard to do with this knotweed growing. And this is the kind of thing where it's constant maintenance to keep it from spilling over like that. And then last but not least, we have public health. So these nasty burns are from either giant hogweed or oh my God, sorry, I've had a brain fog here. Parsnip, and the sap from those plants, if it gets on your skin, it reacts to the sunlight. So once it's on your skin and it's exposed to sunlight, it'll cause these really nasty burns. They're very painful, and as you can see, they look horrible. So that's an example of a negative impact to human health. So Nick, you are up next. If you want to share your screen, I'll stop sharing mine. Hmm.
All
And
right.
Nick, I think, okay, there you go.
Should be coming up here. Okay, we all good? Can you see my slides?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. All right. My name is Nick Dietschler. I'm a researcher with the New York State Hemlock Initiative at Cornell University. We're housed in the Department of Natural Resources at Cornell. I want to thank Sean and Brian and Ari and all the folks at APIPP for having me here today. Really excited to see so many folks tuning in. For those of you that aren't familiar with the New York State Hemlock Initiative, sort of the main focus of our program, we're a group of researchers and extension professionals that are focused on forest health issues in New York State. And predominantly we work with hemlock woolly adelgid. Our goal is to manage hemlock woolly adelgid through multiple different strategies or integrated pest management. And not only do we do research on hemlock woolly adelgid, we actually work with a lot of landowners, state agencies, land trusts, things like that to try to implement these management strategies across New York State. So that's what I'm going
Uh,
to be talking a
hey,
bit
Nick,
about
I'm really
today.
sorry to interrupt. You're in presenter view right now.
Yeah. Oh, okay.
Sorry about that. I tried to
Let's.
find a good pause there because I didn't want to interrupt you.
Oh, no worries. Let's see if there's a way to switch things around here.
Nick, I believe if you hit the display settings at the top, it should give you an option to flip them.
Did that work?
Yes, it
Yes,
did.
very good.
Okay.
Cool.
Awesome.
Thank you. Sorry
Cool.
to interrupt your flow.
Oh, no, no worries, no worries. Okay, all right, getting back into it here. Uh, Get things to there we go. So some of the things that I'm going to cover today is I'm going to dive a little bit into HWA and biological control, the background of it, looking at the life history strategies of both of these insects and trying to give some background information about how they interact. And then we're going to dive into and spend a bulk of the time on integrated pest management of HWA. So we're going to touch a bit on chemical control, talk about kind of our landscape scale release strategy of biocontrol predators and how we're prioritizing and focusing our releases across New York State. And then getting into some of the successes that we're seeing and touching a little bit on some of the challenges as well. Biocontrol is hard, it's complicated. We're going to focus in on the Adirondack Park and talk about releases and some of the management activities that are happening within the park. And then talk about, our rearing program a little bit and kind of how we're seeing those our approach to rearing and actually accessing these insects evolving so we can actually have more predators for release in New York State and beyond. And then we're going to end with private landowners and what can private landowners do and how can private landowners think about managing hemlock on their property, but also provide some resources of how they can be part of this kind of landscape scale integrated pest management strategy that we're moving towards in New York State. Okay, so a little bit of background information on hemlock woolly adelgid. I'm sure many folks in the room here are familiar with this insect, but this is a small aphid-like insect that's not native to the East Coast. There's actually several genetically distinct lineages in Asia and Western North America. And actually, Eastern hemlock and Carolina hemlock here on the East Coast are the only hemlocks in the world that don't have an adelgid associate. So hemlock woolly adelgid was brought here from southern Japan accidentally in the early 1900s. And since finding eastern hemlock here, it was able to settle on those trees. And since there's no natural controls here on the East Coast, they spread quite quickly and they're causing rapid decline and mortality of hemlock forest throughout the East Coast. So, why do we care about hemlock? There's a lot of forest health issues out there. There's a lot of invasive pests and pathogens, but what makes hemlock woolly adelgid unique? Hemlocks are what we call a foundation species. And what that means is those hemlock trees are not just a component of the forest, they're actually the architect that's actually producing this type of forest, this hemlock hardwood forest. They're key to that forest type. They create a really unique ecosystem that many plants and animals depend on. There's hemlock-associated birds such as black-burnian warbler, black-throated green warbler, winter wren, and then there's a whole bunch of other species that utilize hemlock for part of their life cycle. There's unique arthropod or insect communities that depend on hemlock. Hemlock forests are warmer in the winter time, cooler in the summertime, so there's a lot of animals that utilize them for refuge. And then the snowpack underneath hemlock, because of their dense shade, it actually melts slower. So you get a slow discharge of that cool snow melt water into streams in the springtime. This keeps streams cool and oxygen rich, which is really important for a lot of fish species, especially native brook trout. And the problem with hemlock woolly adelgid is it's functionally removing this hemlock forest across the landscape. So even in areas where maybe it didn't kill all of the trees, these unique ecosystem services that we get from large hemlock forests, we're losing those. And there's a lot of these ecosystem services that we depend on as humans as well. So really, when we're talking about protecting hemlock, we're not really talking about just protecting a tree. We're talking about protecting an entire ecosystem and all of the organisms that are associated with it. So hemlock woolly adelgid, was first introduced into the Richmond, Virginia area. That was where it was first found. It kind of lingered there for a while until it got into the Appalachian Mountains. And then once it got into the Appalachian Mountains, it spread pretty quickly to the north and south. Right now, HWA occupies about 50%, a little over 50% of hemlock's native range. It's mostly kind of in this Appalachian area, getting up into New York, but also there's populations, pretty significant infestations in Nova Scotia, out in Michigan, and it's getting into Ontario as well too. And kind of the interesting thing, depending on where you are in the invaded range of HWA, the story around what you're seeing for tree decline or thinking about when it comes to management can look a lot different. And we're sort of in a unique situation here in New York State where we're sort of at this kind of interface where we have had hemlock woolly adelgid for quite a while in some parts of the state, but we also have a lot of areas that we refer to as leading edge, those areas where HWA is actively expanding into uninvaded areas. And when you zoom in to somewhere like New York State, this map is a little bit old. There's some new infested towns here, but when you zoom into somewhere like New York State, you can see it gets even more complex, where we have areas like the Lower Hudson Valley, where we're dealing with situations where HWA has been there for 30 plus years. We have post-aftermath forest, where a lot of those hemlock trees have been killed off. Even for many years, people sort of writing off hemlock in Lower Hudson Valley. It's like, well, there's really not any hemlock left here. There's no point in managing it. We've found that that's not true. There are a lot of remnant forests there, a lot of remnant hemlock forests there that we're working on managing. And then you have places like the Finger Lakes where we've had it for a while. We're starting to see significant decline. We're in the middle of active management. And then places like the Adirondacks where you're really at that leading edge. HWA is just getting in, and we're thinking about how do we stay ahead of this pest. So really, we kind of have all different situations here in New York State that we have to think about. And that's what we're working on doing here at the Hemlock Initiative. So what are we doing? And when I say we, I don't just mean us, but there's a whole group of folks up and down the East Coast that are working on this issue. So we like to use this term integrated pest management, and really, that's just using multiple different strategies to manage a pest to try to control a pest. So one strategy is ultimately not going to work. So we need to come at this from a bunch of different angles. So what are the ways we're doing that? So first, chemical control. This is sort of the tip of the spear when it comes to managing invasive species. It's really effective, but it's logistically challenging. We don't want to put a lot of toxic chemicals out in the environment, so we have to be careful about applying these, but really effective and when used properly. Then there's things like silviculture. This has been applied in a lot of different forest pest situations. I would say this is really, while there's a lot of optimism around silviculture. It's still really kind of in the research realm with hemlock woolly adelgid, but there is actually active silviculture research happening. We're collaborating with SUNY ESF on this, so there's more to come on this, but it's looking promising as a component of this IPM approach. And then you have classical biological control. This is the main focus of our group here at Cornell. And classical biological control involves going back to the native range of a pest, finding those natural enemies there, and then doing research to see, are these enemies, one, going to be safe, and two, going to be effective. And when it comes to classical biological control, we're really looking at specialists. And what that means, it's a specialist predator or parasitoid. It means it's an insect that only feeds on the pest. It specializes on the pest. It can't survive without it. And that's what helps us understand and kind of guarantee that it's going to be safe. And then you have things like resistance breeding. We're involved in this a little bit, but there's a lot of folks looking at resistance breeding for a lot of different forest pests. And what this means is, going out into the landscape into some of those post-aftermath forests where the pest has been for a long time and has killed a large number of those trees, looking for lingering individuals, looking for those individuals that have survived the pest and maybe have some genetic resistance, and then developing breeding programs with those. So the two things that we're really going to focus on for the remainder of this talk is going to be chemical treatment and classical biological control. So chemical treatment, like I said, this is sort of the go-to. This is the Band-Aid. This is that kind of short time frame approach that we use for managing forest pests. When it comes to hemlock woolly adelgid, we're oftentimes using two different chemicals. One of those is imidacloprid, and the other one is dinotefuran. These are neonicotinoid insecticides. They can be applied a bunch of different ways through soil application, soil injection, time-release tablets. trunk injection, that's the most direct, where you're actually injecting the chemical straight into the tree, and then basal bark application. With basal bark application and trunk injection being the two primary ways we apply these chemicals in New York State. So these are systemic insecticides, which means it's not a broadcast spray. It's not being sprayed across the forest. It's actually being applied directly to the tree. The tree's absorbing it, and then as the insect feeds, the insecticide is actually killing the insect as it feeds. So it's very similar to like an inoculation, so to protect those trees. So why do we use two different chemicals? Imidacloprid is a slow-acting chemical, but it's long-lasting. So it can take upwards of a year to become effective, but it can last upwards of 5 years, maybe even a little bit longer. And then dinotefuran, this is a fast-acting chemical, but it doesn't last for a very long time. So it's effective in around a month, but only lasts for 2, maybe 3 years. Oftentimes we're using this as a tank mix, so these can be applied at the same time. And the goal with this is, getting that knockdown punch of those dinotefuran, knock those populations of HWA down quickly, and then allow that imidacloprid to get that long-lasting effect. Another thing when it comes to dinotefuran is elongate hemlock scale. I'm not going to talk about that insect very much, but it's another invasive insect that's impacting hemlock, not nearly as problematic as HWA. But if you do have elongate hemlock scale, dinotefuran is the only chemical that's actually going to take care of that pest. So just something to keep in mind. Okay, moving on to biological control. So there's 3 predators that we predominantly work with here at Cornell, and all 3 of them are specialists. They only feed on HWA, and they're native to the Pacific Northwest of North America, actually all the way from Northern California up into Alaska. We mostly work in the Pacific Northwest. So this is a specialist beetle, Laricobius nigrinus, and then 2 species of flies, Leucotraxus argenticollis and Leucotraxus pinniperta. There's another species of beetle that we work with to some extent in New York State and kind of across the range. We don't actively produce these here at Cornell. Our colleagues at Virginia Tech produce these beetles, but we do releases with these and work with them. So why do we need 3 different predators? Why won't just 1 or 2 do the trick? And a lot of that, the answers to that question lie in the complex life cycle that hemlock woolly adelgid has. So hemlock woolly adelgid has this complex polymorphic life cycle. There's 2 generations per year here on the East Coast. They have an obligate summer diapause, so they're actually dormant in the summertime when most insects are out there. That's one way they evade predation. They come out of that dormant stage in the fall and begin actively growing over winter. They grow all winter long, and then in the spring, they start to lay eggs. Those eggs will hatch, and this gives rise to that second generation. We refer to this as the Pregridians generation or that spring-summer generation. There's no dormancy in this generation, so that happens really quickly. They lay another batch of eggs, and then that starts that process all over again. The issue with HWA, or one of the reasons they're so successful, is HWA is what we call parthenogenic. So they're all female and they're all asexual. So you only need one individual to start a new infestation, and they can reproduce really, really quickly. So the first predator that we work with is Laricobius nigrinus. That's that beetle predator. These synchronize really well with that overwintering generation of HWA. So the beetles, where we have them established in New York, they're out there actively feeding right now. They emerge from the soil in the fall when HWA comes out of that dormancy. They feed all winter long. And then when HWA begins to lay eggs, those adult beetles lay their eggs in the ovisacs of the adelgid. The larvae of the beetles feed on the eggs of HWA before dropping to the soil and starting that cycle all over again. They're really effective at preying on the spring-summer generation, but the fact that they don't, they're really effective at preying on that overwintering generation, but the fact that they don't prey on that spring-summer generation is a problem. Because how I mentioned that they're asexual and they reproduce really quickly, that spring-summer generation can actually cause an almost complete population rebound even in a single year. So that's where the silver flies come into play, those Leucotraxus species. We're still learning a lot about separating out these species and how they're interacting with the prey differently, but we know that Leucotraxus, they're present throughout the life cycle of hemlock woolly adelgid. Those larvae are actually the workhorse of this biocontrol predator. The adult flies actually don't do any feeding, but their larvae feed in the ovisacs, and they're present during both egg-laying stages of hemlock woolly adelgid. So the goal is by establishing all three of these predators on the landscape, they're going to offer really nice complementary control and give us more effective prey suppression of HWA across the landscape. Okay, so how are we thinking about releasing these predators across the landscape? How are we working these two predators in together? So Laricobius nigrinus releases started in 2008, and we've released just under 90,000 beetles across New York State at a bunch of different places across the state. Leucothoraxis releases started in 2017, and we've released just over 97,000 of these two species across the state. And as you can see by the map, our goal isn't necessarily to release these in like one particular area or try to release them in every population or every place that we have hemlock woolly adelgid, but we're really trying to target places across the landscape. And the goal is to establish these populations of all three of these predators so they can actually they can propagate and by themselves in the field and then spread and disperse. So the goal is we're really kind of inoculating the landscape with these predators and trying to get as many populations going so we can get as complete coverage as we can. And we're not focusing on any one particular part of the state. We really want to get predators established both in those post-aftermath forests, like in the lower Hudson Valley, and release as quickly as we can along that leading edge. So what are we seeing with success for these predators? So first, we're going to touch on the Laricobius beetle and look at some of the successes that we're seeing with those beetles across New York State. So those almost 90,000 beetles that we released across New York, those releases are represented at 60 different sites across the state. And so far to date, we've confirmed 18 established populations across New York. Most of these established populations are in the lower Hudson Valley, the Catskills, and then in the Finger Lakes region, with some establishment in Lake Ontario Plain. These are warmer parts of the state. This is where HWA got a foothold first. So that's where some of our older releases are. So a lot of if you look at those colored dots, the black ones represent some of the older releases, stars being established populations. And then as you see those other colors across the state, those are just newer releases. So really, we likely have a lot more established populations of these beetles across the state, but we just have to get back and survey. And we have plans in the works to actually get out there and do a bunch of that survey this spring. And I just want to point out one population here. Because we try to move as quickly as possible, there was a new infestation of HWA found up on Lake Champlain. Haven't even had time to update the map here to show that these two new townships with HWA up on Lake Champlain, but we've already released predators up there. So our goal, along this leading edge here is as soon as we see these HWA infestations popping up, is trying to get predators in there as quickly as possible to get these populations established. It can take a while for these populations of predators to build up to be effective. So we want to get them on the ground as quickly as possible to try to stay ahead of HWA as it moves further north. Okay, so we have establishment across the state. We have 18 populations, and that's just the first phase of biological control. We can't release everywhere, so we really are depending on these predators once they're established to move across the landscape themselves, to spread and disperse. So that's something that we wanted to look at. And I had the pleasure of working with two students, Melanie Halko, who was an undergraduate here at Cornell University. She's now at University of Queensland in Australia working on her PhD, and Kira Borello, who is a high school student in the lower Hudson Valley, who's going to be starting at Cornell in the fall. So what we did is we looked across the landscape and we saw we had all these different established populations. We selected 9 of those populations, 3 in the Finger Lakes region, 3 in the Catskills, and then 3 in the lower Hudson Valley. And then around these populations, we wanted to monitor for dispersal. So we drew buffers around these populations. We drew a buffer from 0 to 8 kilometers, 8 to 16 kilometers, and then 16 to 24 kilometers. Within each one of those buffers, we selected multiple, 2 different sampling locations, and then we went out and monitored to see if we had the presence of predators there, moving away from those established populations. So what did we find? the goal of this project wasn't just to confirm that we had this dispersal, but was to develop new techniques for actually looking for these predators. So we actually tested a couple tried and true methods with a newer method, an old approach, but we wanted to co-opt it for this survey. So we actually developed these yellow sticky traps in collaboration with some folks up in Canada. And then we wanted to look and see, is Laricobius actually attracted to these, and can this trapping method be effective? And it is, it's quite effective. So this is going to allow us to do survey much easier across the landscape in the future. But what did we find for dispersal? We confirmed spread of Laricobius to 39 of the 55 sites that we looked at across New York State. We saw spread in the Finger Lakes, Catskills, and Lower Hudson Valley, and we actually found the first population of Laricobius in Connecticut. So Connecticut's done no releases of Laricobius to date, but they're spreading from New York into Connecticut. So these beetles are not only established, but they're spreading widely across the landscape, upwards of 24 kilometers from these established populations. And we actually have examples of them moving, upwards of 50 miles from a release site, and other places that we found them in New York. So they're moving quite quickly. Okay. So how has our release strategy kind of changed as we've learned more about these predators? So you can kind of see where they're established on the map. It's really in these warmer parts of the state. Lower Hudson Valley, Finger Lakes region, where we're a little bit warmer. The Lower Hudson Valley is quite warm. Around the large Finger Lakes, it's warm in the wintertime. And some of the research that's been done in the south and then here in the northeast that we've participated in has shown that winter temperatures can influence the success of establishment. But a lot of this research has also suggested that larger releases can influence establishment. And with our program developing more effective rearing techniques, we've been able to just have access to more of these predators. We've been able to rear a lot more of them in the lab. So what we've done is just over time increase the number of predators that we're releasing in each individual release. I think this is really important to cold places like the Catskills and the Adirondacks, because as we're able to release more predators in a single release event at a location, that increases the chances of establishment in cooler areas like the Adirondacks. And you can see here that our average release size has gone up from just over 500 to upwards of 2,000 or over beetles per release. And we actually haven't had to sacrifice that much. We're releasing at around 5, and then this last year we released at 8 different sites across New York State. So we're releasing more beetles at each site and really still able to spread these predators across the landscape. So I mentioned this just because that's a lot of those bigger releases are the ones that we need to get back to and survey and see if we have establishment. So more to come on that this spring. Okay, so we're seeing some success with Laricobius. They're establishing spreading across the landscape, but we've already kind of established the point that we need silver flies too. That Laricobius, while it's effective, it is helping. It's not going to do it by itself. We've been working with this insect a lot for not quite as long as Laricobius. Those Laricobius releases started in 2008. We started releasing really in earnest in 2017 in New York State, with a lot of our larger releases happening over the last 5 years. And of those 97,000 flies that we've released across New York, we've released those at 58 sites. And again, really focusing on trying to get releases throughout the state. So what have we learned since 2017? I'm going to just go through some bullet points here. There's a lot of research that we've done, and I just don't have time to go through each study, but I wanted to kind of get you all up to speed on, what are some of the main things that we've learned about this insect that essentially we knew nothing about going in. So Leucothoraxis argenticollis, one of those species, we know that it can overwinter throughout the eastern range. This is the study that I did during COVID. When everyone was stuck at home, I lab reared a bunch of these flies and then shipped them to collaborators up and down the East Coast. So we had sites in North Carolina and Tennessee, and then we had it all the way up to here in New York. We had a site in the Finger Lakes, and then we had one up in Lake Placid, so really cold. And we actually found that these flies, this was a controlled experiment. we figured out what their overwintering stage was, and we saw that these flies can actually overwinter successfully throughout the range on the East Coast. And they actually do better here in New York. So there's something about their biology and our colder winters that they actually seem to do a little better. So we saw survival in the 90% range for both of the sites in New York, even up in Lake Placid. So it appears that these flies have no issues even with a cold Adirondack winter like you all see in Lake Placid. Taking this one step further, we did another study with some of our colleagues in Virginia, where we actually went out, found infested trees, put mesh bags on those branches, and released flies into those mesh bags. We wanted to see, do these flies synchronize with HWA? Are they actually feeding at the right time? Are they emerging at the right time? And are they actually surviving a full year and reproducing in the field? So again, this was a controlled study, all confined in bags. We released flies, and we actually found that Leucotraxis argenticollis, this one species, can complete an entire life cycle in the field in both New York and Virginia. And we saw these flies not just reproduce, but actually successfully overwinter and emerge at the right time the following spring. So, this study is kind of one step removed from an established population. So this was really exciting. And then over the last 3 years, with the last kind of surveying being just this past summer, we looked at sites where we actually released these into the field. So we had 33 different sites up and down the East Coast, with 17 of those sites being in New York State. And we found evidence of 2 established populations in Virginia, and we saw some evidence of successful wild reproduction in Lower Hudson Valley of New York. But even though we looked a whole lot, we didn't find much more than that. And this was, pretty discouraging. Even though some of these releases are quite new and we might just have to wait a bit longer, we were expecting to see a lot more. But then this past summer, in 2025, we added another sampling period on. We actually went out in the summer, went to a subset of our sites, and we actually confirmed an established population in the southern tier of New York and Bath. The last time flies were released were in 2020, so this is 4 years post-release. So this is, these flies are out there. They're reproducing. They're established at this site. So we're excited to modify our survey techniques and actually get out there a little bit later into the summer and see if we can confirm more of these populations. We really know nothing about the life history of these flies. We do a lot of research on the West Coast and try and translate that to the East Coast. What is it going to mean here? So this is really, it's a learning process to try to figure out how can we find these flies. And these are about the size of a fruit fly. So imagine trying to figure out when a fruit fly is going to emerge in the forest and then figure out how to catch it. But we're really excited about this, very, very optimistic. So we're hopeful that we're going to continue to find more of these established populations across New York State. Okay, so that's some of the successes that we're seeing with biocontrol across New York State. And really one of the limiting factors when it comes to biocontrol is just like obtaining these predators. That's kind of the limiting resource here, is just access to predators. How do we get enough to release in all the places that we need them? We published a paper just back in November, kind of outlining our methods. What do we do? How do we get these predators? So this is available. It's on our website if you're interested in kind of all the nuts and bolts of how we rear these predators and get access to them. It's out there. But this is what we can produce in the lab, and we can only produce so many. So we've really had to kind of think about, how can we create like an evolution in predator rearing? How can we get access to more of these predators? And the U.S. Forest Service has come up with some guides and really kind of trying to direct all the land managers and researchers on the East Coast of, what are our priorities to conserve hemlock forest? And buried in this document, there's this guidelines and this directive to be able to redistribute predators, redistribute Laricobius. So what does that mean? So what that means is finding places where we have them established and where we can actually go back and collect them, where we can find places where there's so many predators established in the landscape and actually go back and collect them so we can move them around and do this, facilitate this dispersal ourselves. And we've actually, both in New York and some other states on the East Coast, we've actually been trying to find these places that we can develop as field insectaries, as places where these predators can establish, can reproduce, and then we can actually go back and easily collect them. So we have one of these sites in the Lower Hudson Valley. And just to kind of a little bit of background on the site, this is kind of in that post-aftermath situation where a lot of the overstory hemlocks had died. This has actually released a lot of those understory hemlocks. It's gotten a lot more sun onto them. We've seen regeneration, and we actually have this dense flush of hemlock in the understory. And these trees are anywhere from knee-high to 30 feet high, and there's a lot of low branches that we can reach that helps us to collect predators. So I visited this site for the first time in 2017 and started thinking, this place would be great to try to get predators established at and see if we can develop this field insectary idea here in the Northeast. So over 3 years, from 2018 to 2020, we released just over 2,200 beetles at this site. This is Laricobius nigrinus. And then we started monitoring for establishment. So we found in 2019, just 1 year later, we were able to collect them, but we wanted to release more. We wanted to get a robust population. And we found that they established pretty quickly. When it comes to coming up to 2022, we went back to see, can we actually collect these in mass? In one day, one afternoon, a group of us went out there and we were able to collect 168 adult beetles. And we started monitoring for larvae too in the spring. This is another way to kind of monitor that population building. And then come 2024, we actually were able to go in with a team and one day collect over 1,200 beetles. And this was the first redistribution from the site in Lower Hudson Valley. We actually took these 1,200 beetles and moved them up into the Woodstock area in the Catskills. So this was the first large redistribution effort in New York. This past year, we went back with a larger team and we actually invited in some other states. We invited in land managers from New Hampshire and Vermont to come in and collect, and we collected over 12,600 beetles in over 3 days. So this was massive. We were collecting more beetles than even some of the folks down south were collecting at some of their field insectaries. And this collection effort helped us to release at 3 additional sites here in New York. So we took our almost 7,000 beetles, split them up, and these beetles went to the capital region and then also out into Western New York. So we were able to spread these out and get these facilitate this dispersal. This also helped our friends in New Hampshire bring enough beetles back to do 2 releases in New Hampshire, and then Vermont also brought enough beetles back to do 1 release. So this was really exciting. This is, we need more predators. This is a way we can get them. And people in neighboring states are doing this. They're actually trying to facilitate these field insectaries. So this is an example in New Hampshire where they've done a thinning to promote that hemlock understory, and they're releasing predators into the stand to try to create this field insectary. Okay, so I wanted to just quick, zoom into the Adirondacks and just quickly go over some of the management that's happening in the places where HW is present in the Adirondacks. So as part of our program, we actually have an Adirondack-based field crew that's led by Allie McKenna, and Ben Ferber is a technician working under Allie. And this crew is focused on survey and treatment in the Adirondacks, with a lot of work going into treatment in the Lake George watershed. They use a combination of basal bark application and stem injection treatments to suppress HWA. And over the past 2 years, since this team came on, they've surveyed over 10,000 acres, almost 11,000 acres, looking for HWA. They found new infestations that have led to a rapid response for treatment and biocontrol release. In the past 2 years, they've treated 3,200 trees, and this has been over 180 acres, and predominantly in the Lake George watershed, but they're surveying beyond as well. When it comes to biological control in the Adirondacks, a lot of the stats that I've given so far have kind of lumped these in, but in the Adirondacks, this is just over the blue line. We've released almost 11,000 Leucotraxis and almost 11,000 Laricobius. And that's at 6 sites for Leucotraxis and 5 sites for Laricobius. So you can really see here where we're really focusing on getting releases along this leading edge and trying to get those predators established from Great Saukandog Lake through Lake George up into Lake Champlain, and trying to get those populations established as quickly as they can. So as HWA inevitably moves further into the park, the predators can move with them. So a few take-home messages on biological control before we get into some information about what landowners can do. Laricobius nigrinus has been released across HWA's invaded range and is widely established and rapidly dispersing, even here in New York. Leucotraxis is highly suitable for New York, has been released widely, and we are seeing those first signs of confirmed Leucotraxis establishment in the state. Releases at the northern leading edge are a priority, and this is especially in the Adirondack Park and eastern Lake Ontario. And field insectaries are increasing the predator supply to facilitate that northward spread. Okay, so many of you are private landowners. So what are some of the things that you can do to prepare for HWA or manage it? So the one thing I want to say is, private land management, this is landscape scale integrated pest management. A lot of the forest in New York State is privately owned. And if we don't have private landowners managing hemlock woolly adelgid in their hemlock forest, landscape scale integrated pest management isn't going to work. There's only so much we can do on public protected land. So private landowners are crucial to this landscape scale approach for integrated pest management. So I can't stress this point enough. Early detection and rapid response is key. And survey is probably the most important thing you can do, especially along that leading edge. Knowing when HWA arrives on your property or even on your favorite hiking trail on state land, being able to find that as soon as possible and document it is extremely important. Being able to react to that as fast as we can is key to controlling this pest. And then, if you're managing your own property, have a plan. Have a plan before HWA arrives, so that way you can implement that plan as quickly as possible. Chemical treatment. This is, a short-term approach. We hope to move away from this in the future as biocontrol becomes more established across the landscape. But chemical treatment, when done appropriately, is the best way to manage HW in the short term to keep your trees alive. And it's really important for biocontrol too. If we want biocontrol to work, we need more chemical treatment, keeping those trees healthy while those predator populations build and spread. HWA reproduces really quickly. It outpaces the predators. The predators take time to build up. And then once they reach that critical mass, they can provide effective control, but we need chemical treatment in the short term. And then monitor for biocontrols dispersal. We have protocols in development. We're hoping to bring more private landowners into this program, using those yellow sticky traps to actually help us track dispersal across the landscape and understand if you have predators and work that into your management plan. As part of that dispersal project that we did, there was a bunch of private lands included in that, and these predators are on private land throughout the Finger Lakes, throughout the Lower Hudson Valley. So private landowners are very much benefiting, even though most of our releases are on public protected land. And just stay informed, and attending things like this are really important. Research is underway. We're learning new things every season, every year, and we're trying to get that information out to landowners and land managers as quickly as possible. So our website has a ton of resources that kind of help private landowners through this process and thinking about managing. And I can't really get into all of them today, but I just want to kind of put some of the tools out there and encourage you to go to our website and look at these. So we have the hemlock prioritization tool. This can be for a single property for landowners. We have a version for landowners, and then there's a version for people monitoring and managing across multiple properties with a regional prioritization metric. So this can kind of help you think through the process of what trees you want to treat, what trees you want to protect. So you're not just going in blind. This can give you some guidelines. Next is we have hemlock and HW identification guides. This can help with those survey efforts. If you're not sure exactly what a hemlock looks like, or you have never really seen HWA out in the field, this gives you some, a resource to bring out with you and gives you some guidelines for finding them and then reporting. And there's going to be more on that from the other speakers momentarily. Here's a QR code to this. This is all on our website, and it's free, free of charge. It's just out there for you to use. And then when it comes to treating, you need to be a certified pesticide applicator to treat. So we have a list of licensed applicators. We have a database on our website, so you can go put in your county, and a list of applicators will pop up that you can reach out to and see about doing treat. So that resource is there if you don't know where to start with finding an applicator. And I just want to quickly end with a quick anecdote here, because I think as a private landowner, you can sometimes feel alone with managing these pests, but there's a lot of folks out there managing these pests, and it's really important. We work with a lot of these private landowners. So this is the Cook Farm. This is in Lansing, New York. It's one town over from Ithaca. And this is a multi-generational working dairy farm. The current parcel that we're looking at here in this map that's outlined in yellow is about 225 acres. The farm, they own a lot more land than this, but this is just kind of the one parcel we worked on with them. There's 26 acres of hemlock hardwood riparian forest along Salmon Creek. This is a really important tributary that drains into Cayuga Lake. And they reached out to us in January 2024, and they noticed HWA was causing decline. They wanted to know what they could do. We were planning this Laricobius dispersal experiment. We knew we had an established population nearby, so they let us put some traps out and look for presence of predators on their property. And we confirmed establishment of that Laricobius beetle on their property in fall 2024 and again in spring 2025. And then we helped them find a certified pesticide applicator that could do chemical treatments on their property. And in the fall of 2025, they treated 225 hemlocks on their property, and they plan to treat more in 2026. So this is the kind of work that private landowners are doing across the state. This family, they're not the exception. They're doing a great job managing their hemlock, but there's lots and lots of folks out there managing this. So this is really crucial to keeping hemlocks alive and on the landscape across New York. And before I pass off to the other speakers, I just wanted to kind of end with this. So these are just a couple photos of some just magnificent trees out there. So on the right there, we have a huge tree that was recently found in the Beaverkill Valley. There's an old growth stand that was undiscovered. Some folks found this, and this tree is probably the largest hemlock in New York State. It's about 52 inches in diameter. There's multiple other trees out there. So this is probably, maybe the first and third largest hemlock in New York State are in this stand. And these have hemlock woolly adelgid. There's hemlock woolly adelgid throughout the Catskills. So it's like these monster trees are still out there. These important forests are out there and deserve, us going out there, finding them and protecting them. The other photo is a huge hemlock in the Johns Brook area of the High Peaks. You can see my wife on the lower part of that picture there. The photo doesn't do it justice. This tree's huge. It's growing right out of these granite boulders. And this is probably 100 kilometers from the nearest HWA. So it's like we really are kind of at the forefront of the fight for hemlock and trying to keep these trees alive. And we need to, one, pay attention to the trees that are in the invaded parts of New York, but also there's a lot of hope out there. There's a lot of trees that aren't infested that we really hope that this work and this effort can go into protecting as HWA spreads across the state. So lots of folks to acknowledge. A huge shout out to all of our collaborators at different universities across the East Coast, and our U.S. Forest Service collaborators. Couldn't do it without them. To our funding, New York State DEC is a main source of our funding. So thanks to New York State and also to the U.S. Forest Service. We have a big team here at the Hemlock Initiative at Cornell. And with that, I just encourage you, please go to our website, please reach out to us. We have lots of resources on our website, and don't hesitate to reach out. We're here to help. So that's all I have for today. Thanks so much.
All right, thank you so much, Nick. That was fantastic. Next up is Ari Giller-Leinwohl. He's the Terrestrial Invasive Species Manager with the Adirondack Park Invasive Plant Program. So Ari, if you want to share your screen. And Ari's going to talk for about 20 minutes or so, and then we'll do the Q&A. So we do have some questions in the chat. I've made a note of them, and we'll get through them right after Ari's presentation. So thank you, and hang in there. All right, Ari, I don't know if you're trying to talk here. We can't hear you.
I'm just trying to get the screen going. Hopefully folks can see the slides and hear me.
Yes. Looking good, sounding good. Thank you.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Nick. That was an amazing presentation. What a great update of the state of HWA in New York and everything that the Hemlock Initiative and partners are doing. I'm excited to get into the Q&A. So much to follow up on, but really appreciate all those details. What I'm going to be covering for this section is how folks in the Adirondacks and beyond can get involved with surveys. We've got a program that's been around for 5+ years now called the Forest Pest Hunters program. And the goal is really to get community members involved with surveying for these emerging pests. We have in the winter, hemlock woolly adelgid survey season, and in the summer, beech leaf disease survey season. And that's been over the years really huge for tracking that leading edge that Nick was talking about. This is a map that my colleague Carolyn made, and it's going to be included in our annual report, but I think it does a really good job of tracking where these pests are going over time. And I don't think this data would exist. It's certainly not with this granularity without these forest pest hunters going out and getting this very important data. So part of my talk is going to be, how you can safely get out there, what tools to use, and then also what you're looking for in terms of identifying both hemlock and HWA and reporting via IMAP invasives. Doug Knopp from IMAP, the IMAP team, is going to get on and talk about the statewide winter HWA challenge at the end, and we'll have some time for Q&A. So let me dive into it. First, to brag and thank the Forest Pest Hunters. Oh my goodness, this map is nothing but Forest Pest Hunter data from IMAP invasives. Those orange hexes, that's zoomed out where there's presence. But I really wanted to include this map because all the tan circles, those tan dots, are non-detect points. So we have covered a lot of ground each season. 2025, almost 200 hours, searching 42 trails. And last year, for Hemlock Lily adelgid, over 1,300 individual points put in IMAP. So congrats. We won the IMAP challenge for the 2025 winter season, but we'll see what happens with the statewide challenge this year. You'll hear more from Doug. But yeah, a lot of maps and different resources. We can put these links into the chat, but I just wanted to give an overview of some of the resources available to folks. We've got APIPP's adopted trail map that we'll take a look at. This is a great way to look at where there are opportunities to survey, and then you can give folks a heads up and adopt that map on shared map. Also dive into the maps that DEC has. So once you decide which trail you're interested in, you sign up on our adopted trail map. You can go over to DEC's website and really dive into a lot of cool free mapping software. And in terms of the survey details that I'll dive into, on APIPP's website, we've got our Forest Pest Hunter page and a lot of detailed links. That's where you'll get to the adopted trail map. That's where you can see our detailed HWA survey protocol and a PDF version of the IMAP app information. So in terms of the tools, on the right, that's more the professional tools. I don't be going out there cutting branches and taking samples back of HWA. But the things on the left, I wanted to illustrate for sure. Winter gear that I'll dive into. A hand lens can be good to get a closer look at HWA. And a headlamp is also unexpectedly really useful as you're looking up at branches. That headlamp can really illuminate the fuzzy HWA. So yes, it's snowing here in Keene Valley. So definitely keep an eye out for what the weather is going to be doing. Most of your phones probably have weather apps. I really recommend looking at NOAA weather, NOAA.gov. And if you want to get into the nitty gritty, if you're not sure what that 50% snow or not, that forecast discussion is incredibly useful. And if you're planning on hiking in more exposed areas, mountain summits, a lot of the northeastern mountain summits have their own mountain point forecasts. So, I mean, forecasts always unpredictable, but really good data sources to have a better sense of what you're in for. And especially for winter surveys, you definitely want to be prepared. I'm not going to go into detail here, but definitely 10 essentials, hiking with a partner, letting people know where you're at, signing into trail registers are all good ideas. And yeah, I mean, sure footing. So those trekking poles from the picture before, I think are really relevant. Traction, whether it's snowshoes that are required in the high peaks region or micro spikes in areas where it might be icy, warm clothes, synthetic versus cotton layers, all important things to consider. So definitely stay safe out there. First and foremost, if you're not out there staying safe and healthy, then the survey points are very secondary for sure. But diving into the surveying, what are we looking for? I think we have a lot of folks that love hemlock on here, but I wanted to make sure some key identifying features for this tree. The bark to me looks a bit like pine. It's a bit more reddish, less gray. It can get quite blocky and scaly as the trees get mature. Compared to these illustrations here, I will say a lot of times you're not going to see branches right down to ground level, especially on mature trees. That's just sort of a natural trait of the tree to shed lower branches that are in the shade. The needles, or excuse me, the cones are fairly small relative to other conifers in the area. So a brief overview of what you're looking for to find a hemlock. Um, the needles are going to have white stripe on the underneath of the needle. And in comparison to like spruce is sharp with their needles, and hemlock is not. They're going to have flat needles. They're not spiky at the end. Comparing it to, say, like a fir tree, another conifer in the region, fir needles are going to be more round versus hemlock needles are more flattened. So once you're pretty confident that you've got a hemlock tree, you want to look for those HWA that Nick was talking about. They're sort of a weird pest in that during the winter, they are actively feeding. It's not like they're really hibernating or dormant, but they're not moving around. So as they're going through these different nymphal stages in the winter, they accumulate these white woolly masses over top. And so that's, for me, what I tend to look for when I'm looking on the underside of hemlock branches. Um, this picture here is a fairly dense infestation. You see a lot, but sometimes you'll just see one. So I think very key things to keep in mind is these aren't actually feeding on the needles. So you will not find HWA on the underside of the needles, but rather right at the base on the twigs. So that's important. We'll dive into some lookalikes next in terms of how you can decipher, is it HWA? Is it not? But ultimately, the more detailed pictures you can take and submit either directly to us or preferably via IMAP invasives, then we'll have experts that review those. So this is what you're looking for, and sometimes even the experts get tripped up. So I'd say the most detailed pictures, the better. So I thought I would practice with everybody for a little bit in terms of like, what are we looking for? Some great pictures I got from Naishi last year in terms of what are lookalikes versus what is HWA. So right here, I'll give it away. There's no HWA in these pictures. That hemlock elongate scale, EHS, that is one that's actually going to be on the needles. And generally, they're more tan to brown versus the white HWA. So these pictures here are both EHS. Spider, not going to have too much confusion normally, but their egg sacs can trip folks up. So that's what we're seeing here. Again, it's not at the right location, but these egg sacs can be laid anywhere. They're not always on the needle. Sometimes they can be on the twigs as well. The actual HWA feels and looks quite woolly, almost like little threads of cotton. And spittlebug foam, it's the same color, white, but it is more foamy. So that's going to be different. In general, you're not going to see a lot of browning to the HWA needles. They're sort of on or not. So there's some other pests where you'll have like localized areas of browning or engraved looking needles. So those are all things that I sort of look at if you're seeing a damaged tree, a tree with some thinning branches. Well, now we're looking underneath. You've got your headlamp looking up to illuminate the branches. I'll let everybody practice for a second because I'll let you know we've got one picture with HWA here. All right, we're somewhat short on time, but HWA. This is where I take a closer look on this bottom picture here and see could this be a spittle bug? If we zoom in and we see this foam, not HWA. If the location's wrong, we've got EHS on the bottom of the needles, not HWA. Here, I'm not sure. We've got to keep zooming in and looking branch to branch. All right, here's another one. I'll just go clockwise here. So this to me looks like probably spider egg sacs. It doesn't look quite cottony enough. The location's wrong, so not HWA. This might be hemlock leaf miner, that localized yellowing without any of the cottony egg masses. They're not looking like HWA. Color's right, but we've got a spider. Location's wrong. Not sure which insect egg or somebody this could be. But here, that's a pretty heavy HWA infestation. So I hope that gives a quick run through in terms of like what my survey thought process are. But yeah, so that's sort of like what I hope that folks get a little more information, and there's a lot more in that Forest Pest Hunter. We've got a whole like survey document, but that's, I hope, some really key pictures, key characteristics, finding hemlock, finding HWA, ruling out these other pests, and all the data is good data. If you're not sure, still submit it to IMAP, and then we'll review it, follow up if we need to. But for folks that aren't aware yet, what am I talking about with IMAP invasives? I feel so lucky in New York to have access to this database. I mean, for what we're talking about, it's hemlock lily adelgid, but all of our terrestrial and aquatic invasives can be new observations, can be submit by the public, and professionals use this too. So it ends up being a really good one-stop shop for a lot of different projects. How can we dive into effective management or research, not knowing the accurate distribution? So lucky to have this, but it's only as good as the data that comes in. So hopefully give you a quick rundown of how to use IMAP invasives to put in information. So imapinvasives.org, that's where you'll set up your account. Just basic information, and then you get emailed just to like confirm your account. Some of this is going to be Adirondack specific, but I'll point out where. And I'll also, if I'm flying through this, we've got a PDF tutorial on our website. So when you log into IMAP invasives, this is more just like showing you how cool that the web-based database is. So you can filter by records, look just for HWA. But with the Forest Pest Hunter program, so if you're in the Adirondacks and you want to join APIPP for surveys, once you have an account set up, make sure you go to projects and join APIPP Volunteer Forest Pest Monitoring. Do not join APIPP as an organization. That's to keep track of our in-house staff work. But if you want to join the Forest Pest Hunters under the project, you can search for APIPP Volunteer Forest Pest Monitoring, and then I'll make sure to go on and confirm everybody's pending registration. So first and foremost, that's how to join Forest Pest Hunters. We'd love you to join us, but you can use IMAP invasives whether you're part of this project or not. So once you've got that set up online, you want to make sure whether you're on Android or Apple in the App Store, you're going to look for the IMAP app, the IMAP invasives app. And that's what you're actually going to take with you out in the field while you're surveying. So you're signing in with that same sign in to IMAP invasives once you open the app on your phone. And this is what enables you when you're hiking around to take photos, select a species, put in notes. If you want to do this, and I would recommend doing this before you get out for a hike, make sure you know how to use it. You can put in as many fake species observations as you want. So this is a great way just to test the system, shake it down, make sure that you can collect the data you need once you actually get out into that hemlock grove. Over the course of your hike, you can make as many observations as you want for different locations, even different pests. This time of year, hemlock lily adelgid is probably going to be your main target. When you see them accumulate, they'll all be in yellow here, and that means they are not submit to the database yet. So you want to make sure they're all checked off, upload them, have the screen go blank, and that's a good sign that all that data you worked so hard to get is now over to IMAP invasives, helping out projects like this. It'll show up as pending first, and then we have experts that review it, and it'll end up going all the way through. So a couple notes for like ways to approach surveys. We've got our Adopt a Trail map that I'll dive into. But when you're actually out, boots on the ground, I like to find a hemlock grove, and you obviously can't look at every tree if you have a huge dozens-acre grove with thousands of branches. But I try to cover like multiple cardinal directions of a branch, looking up with a headlamp, and looking for those woolly egg sacs that we went over. Those detailed photos are essential. Even if I really trust your survey acumen, I can't hit confirm unless I have those detailed HWA photos like we went over. Please don't remove any branches to look at HWA, but sometimes those branches are awfully hard to get to. So I would recommend if you have like a really mature grove where you don't have a lot of low-hanging branches, to look on the ground and see if any branches with needles maybe fell on the ground. And that's a way to survey too. So if you're going for a long grove, you don't necessarily need to make a non-detect observation point for every single tree that you go. What folks could do is when you start surveying, put down a point, and then when you stop, you're at the other end of like a zigzag or linear path through a grove where you're looking at multiple trees. You could just say, search from here to here and save you a lot of effort. Non-detect information is super important. So don't just feel like you need to only put observations when you find HWA. That non-detect observation information is really important too. We want to know where you didn't find HWA. I guess I just put this note in where it's, don't feel like you need to get bogged down and put thousands of points in if that's going to keep you from covering the ground you need to survey. So the adopted trail map, this is on our Forest Pest Hunter website. I hope this is going to be a great resource for people. It's color coded this year. So the green ones, thanks, we've already got 4 trails adopted. The red are priority trails. These are going to be the most likely to be on that leading edge where we expect HWA to be spreading, unfortunately. And then as you zoom in, it actually shows the specific trails. So to highlight some key areas, Great Lake Sacandaga was an observation made last year. So west of the Lake George watershed, this is a pretty key data point, and we are quite intrigued where this infestation stops. So right now, it's really just confined to the Conklinville Dam area in Great Sacandaga. Similarly, way up by Lake Champlain, community member reported HWA in Port Douglas along the shore of Champlain. So that's a 50-mile jump from where the known leading edge was, more central Lake George. So definitely now I would say the Champlain Valley is another leading edge area where this adopted trail map really highlights a lot of Champlain area trails and other public parcels like Split Rock Mountain in that area. So I really encourage folks to utilize our adopted trail map to find particular areas. And then you can also, once you find a trail on your adopted trail map through APIPP, you can go over to DEC's interactive trail map. And that's, I didn't realize until like last year, getting ready for Forest Pest Hunter season, how much information free in terms of mapping is from DEC. So they've got this interactive trail map. That's what you're seeing on the left here. Aha. And then survey tools that are more like map-based. This map on the right, I can't tell where hemlock is, but I can find what trail I want to go to. But then you could toggle to say satellite imagery. And these darker patches are probably conifers. Can't tell you whether they're hemlock or not, but just wanted to point out some interesting tools to really target your survey and plan. You know, if you're parking on this bottom trailhead here, you might have a bit of a walk before you get into a hemlock grove to survey. Also worth noting that these are geo-referenced PDFs now. So if this is a particular DEC parcel, you can go to that particular parcel's website, download a geo-reference PDF, throw that in your phone, and then be able to, if you're connected to the internet, have a blue dot and navigate with a map that looks an awful lot like this. But it's certainly not a cure-all. You want to be comfortable navigating without tools like this, especially in the wintertime. Want to stay safe out there. But yeah, I find it quite a useful tool. So that was a really quick rundown of a lot of great forest pest stuff. And, you know, you all are the ones that make this program work. Thank you so much to the existing and hopefully future forest pest hunters for getting out there and helping with projects like this. The data you collect is really integral to informing projects, and the chicken or the egg of effective management really being informed by accurate species distributions. And I can't think of a better way to do it. So the only thing that I haven't really pointed out yet is the survey 123 that Carolyn, APIPP's data manager, this might be our public debut of it, So this QR code here is a really good way to get APIPP over information about your surveys. Still use IMAP invasives for those observation and non-detect points, but this is a great way to get us over your survey summary. You can draw a polygon to show where you hiked. You can give us how many survey hours, any questions. So this is another way to communicate us versus those IMAP observations. Definitely put those in, but a new tool that I'm excited to share with you. So now I'm going to hand it off to Doug, who's going to talk a bit about the IMAP challenge, and then we'll follow up with you for Q&A session.
Great, thanks, Ari. And special thanks again to APIPP and Hemlock Initiative for allowing me to piggyback off of their presentation to talk a little bit about the statewide challenge. So again, my name is Douglas Knopf. I work as the Invasive Species Project Specialist for the New York Natural Heritage Program on our Invasive Species Database team. So if you want to skip to the next slide there. And so how our organization operates is we're under the New York Natural Heritage Program, NYNHP, which is the organization that's responsible for being the data collectors and record keepers for all of the state rare, threatened, and endangered species and ecosystem type information throughout the entire state. And as one of the greatest threats to rare species is the establishment and spread of invasive species, we also administer the official invasive species database program under NYNHP. So this includes the IMAP Invasives Centralized Database Program, as well as a number of data collection tools and data analyses and prioritization models, where we take all that data that comes in, crunch the numbers, and give useful information to our statewide partners on how to prioritize their invasive species management. So we are the official invasive species database for New York. We work directly with a lot of these different programs, state agencies like DEC or state parks, all the different PRISM networks across the entire state, so APIPP and all the other PRISMs. But we also rely very heavily on our community science programs. So, there's a lot of people working directly with invasive species, people like APIPP and state workers, specifically looking for invasives and doing work with it, but they can't cover all the areas in the state. There's a lot of different areas that are kind of data gap areas. So we rely on just average people going out doing outdoor recreation, hiking through the forest, things like that, to keep an eye out for invasive species and fill in those gaps. So if you want to go to the next slide. And to help facilitate getting the public engaged in collecting invasive species data, we administer a number of different mapping challenges throughout the year. So we've identified species in New York that are data gap species. We know they're common, or we're not exactly sure where they are, and we want to get as much information as possible. And we put out these little challenges to encourage people to go out and look for and report what they find. So back in 2022, we started the Hemlock Woolly Adelgid Challenge to help establish that leading edge that Nick was talking about, know exactly how far the extent of Hemlock Woolly Adelgid is in New York, and identify if there are any data gap areas. So the way to do this is very straightforward. I already went through a lot of the information already. Setting up an account with IMAP Invasives, downloading one of our data collection tools, and going out and surveying for Hemlock Woolly Adelgid. If you find it, submitting presence points. If you are looking for it and you don't find it, submitting not detected points. And this challenge just kind of runs in the background of all of the specific work that organizations like APIPP are doing. You don't have to do anything special to participate in this challenge. If you're collecting data with IMAP, our app, or submitting data online to IMAP, all of that gets automatically counted towards the challenge. So from now until March 15th, that challenge will be running in the background, and all of the data that you are collecting as part of the APIPP Forest Pest Hunter program, or any of the other HWA programs running throughout New York State, all of your data automatically will be filtered into that. And like I already had mentioned, APIPP had the most points last year, so we give a prize for the top PRISM as well as the top individual reporters for the state. So you want to go next slide? And we also try to prioritize, like we had mentioned, those data gap areas and those leading edge. So the map on the left there, the base map shows areas in New York State where there are dense hemlock stands. And then those red blocky layers over top are municipalities in New York where hemlock-woolly adelgid has already been established, and we have data for it already. And the areas in those blue circles are kind of that leading edge data gap where we want to focus on getting new information and having new surveys conducted. So the map over on the right there shows priority counties, areas where we really want to focus on getting the most thorough data possible to see how hemlock-woolly adelgid is continuing to spread and continuing to establish along that leading edge. So for areas in those counties, we give double the amount of points for individuals submitting data. And then on the bottom there, that link, New York imapinvasives.org/HWA. We have a dedicated page on our website that goes over information for this mapping challenge. This includes links to help documents on how to make an account, download the app, survey for HWA, as well as links to things like APIPP's Forest Pest Hunter program, the Hemlock Initiative website, things like that. And we also have a dashboard where you can see the data coming in live, a live view from the IMAP Invasives database, to keep an eye on where in the state data is being contributed for and see who is in the lead for the challenge. Next slide. So Ari went over this a little bit as well. How many points you should take. If you are looking for it and you don't find it, you can take just a couple of points at the beginning of a trailhead and as far into a trail as you go. If you are out in a forested area and you're just looking at stands of trees, you can take a couple of points in the middle of stands. If you do detect HWA, 1 point per stand is enough, or if there's kind of intermittently spread individual trees, you can report as needed. In the end, being as thorough as possible is always best. If you are focused on just scoring as many points as possible for our mapping challenge, we usually say 100 meters between sites is ideal. So, walking a few hundred feet before you take another data point, whether it's detected or not detected. All right, next slide. And then finally, I just wanted to shout out again to the different prisms that are doing hemlock-woolly adelgid specific programs throughout the state. So obviously the Adirondacks has their program running right now. And then there's 3 other prisms in New York that have HWA specific survey programs in Western New York, Finger Lakes, and Sligo. So if you're in any of those areas, those are regions where we, again, are very focused on getting new data for HWA to monitor the spread. But if you are newer to invasive species monitoring, or you want to get more involved with volunteer efforts for invasive species in your area, all of New York State is covered by one of 8 PRISM regions, and they all have various volunteer programs that run throughout the year where you can get involved doing things like guided hikes, survey programs, or volunteer removals, where you can learn more about invasive species and can get more involved in your local communities. And I think that's all the slides I had. Again, if you want to learn more about the challenge, you can go to our website. I'll make sure that the links are included in the email that goes out after the presentation. And you can also reach out to us directly if you have any questions or if you have any difficulties getting an account set up. If you have an old account that you're trying to access again, reach out to us at any time and we'll help you get set up. And another big shout out to APIPP and Hemlock Initiative for partnering with us for this. And with that, I'll pass it back to APIPP.
Yeah, thank you, Doug, and thanks to Nick and Ari as well for the great presentations, and thanks to all of you for attending today. Ari, if you could go to the next slide, please. We actually did have a question in the chat that I'm going to hit right now, but it was about monitoring for HWA. So APIPP focuses on monitoring for HWA usually through the beginning of April or so. It kind of depends on the weather. And then midsummer to fall, we ask our forest pest hunters to look for beech leaf disease. But anytime you can report any invasive species that you find using IMAP invasives, whether it's underwater or on land. So I just want to throw that out there while we're talking about IMAP, that, yeah, it's not just for HWA and beech leaf disease. So a quick shout out, we have 2 upcoming events here in February. We have the Adirondack Prism Midwinter Terrestrial Partner Meeting, and then we have the Aquatic Partner Meeting, and those are on February 11th and 12th respectively. It's a great chance for us to hear what our partners are up to and kind of get on the same page before the busy summer season begins. We do this every year. And then we will also have an aquatic webinar, kind of like this one today in March. Stay tuned for that. The best way to keep up on APIPP events and news and anything like that, trainings, is to sign up for our newsletter. We do a monthly email newsletter, and I will send out a link for the sign up form in the follow-up email. And just a reminder, there will be a follow-up email once the video for this is uploaded to our YouTube channel. I'll send that out with a link to the recording, and then a lot of the links that you saw here in the chat and on the screen will be included in that email too. So if you missed something, don't worry, we'll be sending out more information. So next slide, Ari. And last, I just want to give a shout out to our outreach materials. These are all free. We have a whole bunch of them. They don't do any good in our basement. We encourage you to order them. You can reach out to me directly, or you can visit our website, adkinvasives.com/order. We have protect your forest, protect your waters, don't move firewood. We have posters. We have a terrestrial field guide to invasive species of the Adirondacks. That's great if you're going out in the field. It fits in your back pocket. Covers 28 different species that you're going to find in the Adirondacks. And then we have a brand new Love Your Lakes brochure that goes over tips that anyone can really follow to kind of help protect the lakes that you love. So there's a couple about invasive species in there, but we partnered with some of our partner organizations to kind of cover a wider range of things that people can do to help protect their lakes. So again, all that can be found on our website. You can download it on our website, but you can also order hard copies if you prefer those. And next slide, please. All right, so now we're going to move on to questions. We had a bunch in the chat, and I've made a note of them, so I'm going to kind of go through those. And then after that, if there's time, if people want to come off mute and just ask questions directly, that would be fine too. This is actually a great question, and Brian did answer it in the chat, but I want to put it out there right now. Ari, this one's for you. I use IMAP Invasives for lake protectors work. Can I use the same login for Forest Pest Hunters work? Is it easy to toggle back and forth? I thought this might be useful for everyone to hear.
Yes, definitely. It sounds like you're all the way there. I guess I don't have the specific answer of like, you can get the data over to IMAP Invasives with your current account. I defer to Doug. I assume they could go onto their current account and join that APIPP volunteer forest pest monitoring group.
Yes, so you can have one IMAP Invasives account for all the different projects you're doing. So I know for the APIPP Forest Pest Hunter, there's a specific project that you can tag your data to. And for other projects, you might want to tag data to those ones. But you can be part of as many organizations or projects as you want with just one centralized account. It's just a matter of toggling which project you're tagging the data towards.
Okay, cool. Thanks, Doug. All right, how do you determine, I think this one's probably for you, Nick. How do you first determine that the predators you release would not likely negatively affect other native organisms?
Yeah, so there's a lot of research that goes into these organisms before anything's released. So there's no choice tests where they're actually they're put on other native insects that they might potentially feed on, and then you look at developmental rate and survival. And then there's choice tests where they're given their pest of choice, and then a bunch of other options that might be in the native range. And then, basically looking at, do they develop on anything else that could be, problematic here in the range where we're releasing them. And then if it's determined that, nope, they really are specialists, they really do need the invasive pest to survive, then they, go through a whole review through the USDA APHIS and are ultimately either approved or not approved based on all of that research. So it's, it takes, 5 to 10 years of research before any of these insects are actually released.
Great, thank you. And here's another one for you. So yeah, these are all the earlier questions. Can predators, and I'm assuming they mean biocontrols, survive in non-HWA infested areas?
No, so that kind of goes back to that other question. It's like if the pest isn't present, they're not going to survive. So they really do. So I think that's a good point. There's sort of like a nice question that's hidden in there, and it's like the goal with like HWA biocontrol isn't to eliminate HWA. Like the goal isn't to eradicate HWA. We're just trying to live with it, and that's to have predator populations, you need the pest. And then the goal is that the predators are going to manage that pest below a damaging threshold. So yeah, they need HWA, and we're never going to eradicate HWA.
Yeah, kind of a related question. I think you might have touched on this already in your presentation, Nick, but what evidence is there that biocontrols are helping hemlocks survive HWA?
Yeah, that's a tough one to actually look at. But there's been a little bit of research that came out of our colleagues' labs at Virginia Tech, where they actually showed in the presence of just Laricobius, so the one that doesn't seem to control HWA completely by itself, we actually do see increased photosynthetic rate and increase in new growth on hemlock of the hemlock. So there actually does seem to be some benefit to just the Laricobius alone. And I guess just like anecdotally from my observations in the field here in the Finger Lakes and even down in Lower Hudson Valley, places where there is Laricobius, like we do just see the trees, they look a little bit healthier. But we do have plans in the works with New York State Parks and DEC and some of our other collaborators to actually dive into some of these questions and actually look at efficacy of the predators here in New York State. So that's an evolving story here in the Northeast, and we hope to have more data on that in the next couple of years.
Cool. I've got one more on the biocontrols. So is there a defined threshold, for example, population size or time, for considering a community established, and how long does it typically take for the biocontrols to establish?
Yeah, there's sort of like an agreed upon threshold of like 3 years, 3 years post-release to consider them established. Uh, it's sort of like unclear like why like where that kind of comes from, but that seems to be kind of a good like rule of thumb that a lot of us go by is kind of waiting 3 years, and then after that the population is kind of considered stable and it's not going to go anywhere. So that's why like when I showed that map and we saw a lot of those newer releases, like we just hadn't gotten back to survey. That's because we kind of wait for that 3 year threshold to actually go out and survey and look for them.
Okay, cool. So I think that's all I had for biocontrols. I have three here on chemical treatment. Are there any effective chemical treatments for HWA that aren't neonics?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And I'm not a huge fan of chemical treatment. I don't like the idea of putting out these chemical pesticides that do have off-target impacts, but unfortunately, there's not. You can use dormant horticultural oil, but that's actually could be worse. That's a broadcast spray. You need to actually cover the tree with it, and that's going to kill anything that it comes in contact with. Where these systemic pesticides, it really is the most targeted way. There's a lot of research out there looking at the off-target impacts, and while there are some, they appear to be relatively minimal and temporary. And there's even kind of most directly can be arthropods that feed on hemlock. They're going to be directly impacted right alongside HWA, but I think the paper is like 3 years post-treatment. They actually see both abundance and diversity of insects in the canopy is actually greater in trees that were treated versus trees that weren't treated because the health of the untreated trees declines so much that they can't even support the arthropod communities the same way that that treated tree is supporting them. So again, they need to be applied carefully, and they need to, applicators need to follow the label. And there are off-target impacts, but they research shows they're pretty minimal.
And can chemical treatments be used prophylactically before infestations?
We do not recommend folks do that. And that's why survey is so important, and having a plan, because you want to be ready to apply that chemical as soon as you see HWA show up. But you don't want to apply it early because it could take a while. Like it could take years before HWA, depending on where you are, to arrive. And as soon as you apply that chemical, the clock starts ticking. So it could just be wasted money. But also we don't want to impact native organisms unnecessarily. So yeah, survey, watch your trees, go out and look every year, and be ready to act when you do see HWA show up.
Cool. And I've got one more on the chemical treatments. When or what season is the optimal time to apply the chemicals?
Yeah, so spring when the ground thaws, and then fall when kind of the rain starts and we have moist soils again. So if the soil is dry or the ground's frozen, the tree isn't going to be moving as much moisture up into the canopy, and that evapotranspiration is actually what pulls the chemical up into the canopy. So you want to make sure the tree is photosynthetically active. So spring and fall are kind of the main times to treat.
Great. Thank you, Nick. I have a couple here that I think are probably good for Ari to answer. Um, Actually, one just came in from Ben. Why don't we do that? How does HWA spread, Ari?
Well, that's one of the reasons why we cut off the survey season generally like early April, because once they're in that mobile crawler stage, and that's going to happen in spring through summer. So people could move them around, but birds, they definitely, and I forget who did this study, but they're tracking like individual species of birds that they're finding these cisterns on. So that might be one of the ways where like it certainly seems like a lot of the HWAs along shorelines in the Adirondacks. So winter mortality, like Nick talked about, could that be insulating from extreme cold? Or could those be migratory pathways, flight pathways for birds? Both could be factors for sure.
Great. We have, I'm going to kind of combine these because we have a couple questions that came in that are really kind of two versions of the same thing. Any advice for identification with these monster hemlocks? How do you make observations at the top of a tree?
That's an awfully tricky one. That's where I suggested like looking down on the ground to see if any of the branches had fallen off. And hopefully those trees are regenerating, so you could like find adjacent trees to look at. But in the professional community, this is, how can we find trees where people can't get to them? There's environmental DNA testing. So that's an option that we're going to continue to pursue more on the research side. Or I know the Canadian Forest Service is using traps, like funnel traps, like are used for emerald ash borer. But yeah, it's not just with the forest pest hunters. Even the professionals struggle with that exact problem.
Great. We have a couple more in the chat. If you guys have time, we'll get to those. We're a little over time. But these are great questions. So yeah, Karen says Cornell had contacted me last summer to inspect my property in the town of LG, I'm assuming Lake George, but I suspect they ran out of time. They did find HWA on the adjoining 12 acres owned by the Lake George Land Conservancy. Is it likely HWA is on my property or Cornell will come this summer to inspect? Nick, I don't know if you can answer that or.
That's probably the field crew that I referenced that we have up there in the Lake George watershed. Yeah, they have a lot of ground to cover. So I think, they were probably hoping to get to your property to look around, but, just ran out of time because they're balancing that with treatment too. If it's on the immediate adjoining property, I would say there's good odds that you also have HWA, but I would say it's worth getting out there and looking. And you can start looking anytime now. It'll become easier and easier to see as we get into late winter, early spring, when things start to warm up a little bit, but it should be easy enough to find now. So yeah, I'd recommend getting out there and taking a look or reaching back out to the folks that reached out to you and just touching base with them. Or if you want to email me directly, I can kind of help make that connection. So.
Great. Thanks, Nick. All right, we've got one more from William. I've been surveying for HWA for the last 10 years. Would it be helpful to return to sites with detected HWA?
I mean, if you've already found HWA there, I would recommend going to new areas to look for it. Oftentimes, if we're looking to do biocontrol release somewhere, we try to visit that site in the current year because the populations fluctuate quite a bit. So there's more requirements for biocontrol release that we want to make sure like the adelgid's alive, the trees are healthy enough, the populations of HWA are still high enough there to support predator release. But I would say for just showing whether HWA is there or not, presence absence, like going once, confirming, and then I think it's worth moving on at that point.
All right, thanks. If I missed your question in the chat, it was not intentional. If you want to come off mute and ask a quick question, I think that'd be okay as long as the speakers have another minute. If not, we can sign off.
There's one thing I want to mention because there was a discussion before the talk started, and then there's a couple comments throughout. So like with winter mortality of HWA, so that's something we monitor across the state every year. We try to keep an eye on, what does HWA winter mortality look like? And while I think, areas in the north, especially the Adirondacks, and as you move further north, are protected somewhat by winter temperatures, I wouldn't rely on that a whole lot. It varies quite a bit from year to year based on elevation, proximity to water bodies. So even some of these estimates that we come up with regionally, they might not be specific to your property. So I wouldn't say, hey, my property's cold. We're further up north, like we're good. And it's really not the absolute cold, like the absolute winter temperature, the absolute low. Oftentimes the largest jumps in winter mortality we see are later in the winter, kind of getting into early spring, when we have like a week of warm weather, and then the temperature drops really quickly overnight. So it's those quick changes that actually kill more adelgids, because a lot of insects can adapt to cold. But once it gets warm, there's no reason for them to stay adapted to that cold. There's no reason for them to like keep up the effort to keep themselves, tolerant of or avoiding that freezing. So anyway, it's those late season quick changes in temperature that kill the most adelgid. So there's a little, I guess, like misinformation out there about like insects and what winter is actually doing with them. So just kind of take that information with a grain of salt of like, oh, we're cold, we're safe.
Okay, thanks for following up on that, Nick. Yeah. All right. Any last minute questions before we sign off? Going once?
First, thank you all for your contributions. I have a question about the impact of biocontrols on imidacloprid. Is there any information out there?
So the like imidacloprid potentially interacting with the biocontrol negatively, I think is what you're referencing.
Yes.
Yeah. So once the predators are established, we don't worry too much. They seem to work really well together. The predators aren't scavengers, so they're not going to go after dead adelgids that potentially have imidacloprid in them. That being said, if we do a biocontrol release or we're doing a release on a property where treatment's happening, we try to time that or pay a little more attention to the timeline. And that's where the two chemicals comes into play too. So imidacloprid, while it's really effective for a long time, that buildup time of a year, that's just a buildup time to actually kill the adelgid. Just because the adelgid's not dying doesn't mean imidacloprid isn't present in the adelgid at lower levels. That can actually bioaccumulate in the predators and then impact the predators. So including dinotefuran, which kills the adelgid a lot faster, that's important in the early stages of release. So there is a little bit of timing and intentionality behind pairing treatment and biocontrol, but once they're established, I wouldn't worry about it. So as a private landowner, like I would say, if you're just wanting to treat on your property, like don't worry about it, treat the trees, like the predators will disperse in there eventually.
Great. Thank you. Thank you. Okay, we are about 15 minutes over, but does anyone have any last questions? And thank you to Nick and Douglas and Ari for sticking around.
Yeah, happy to join
And I just want to
everybody.
say, like,
Project.
and I just want to say, like, if questions come up in a week or a month or a year from now, please feel free to reach out to our program. We're here to support private landowners and land managers across the state. So, that's what we're here for. So.
Great, thank you. Yeah, there will be a follow-up email. Like I said, it takes a little time to get everything downloaded and uploaded and all that, so it might be a day or so, but there will be a follow-up email with a lot of information and links, so stay tuned for that. And please sign up for our email newsletter if you haven't done so already. There'll be a link to that in the email as well. All right, thanks again to all of our speakers. Great job, and yeah, have a good day, everyone.